Howdy, everyone, and welcome to Wild Weiss, the community podcast for Calgary Weiss Schwarz. I'm today's host, Tim Jency. Today, we've got the curator of one of the best resources for Weiss Schwarz players of all skill levels on the show to get their take on Weiss and how to write about it. Author and curator of Weiss Almanac, Weiss Judge, person who transcribes part of my podcast faster than should be even possible, and Weiss Global Facebook moderator. The list goes on, but I'm going to stop it here. Welcome, Alex Schiefler, to Wild Weiss. How y'all doing?
Hi, Tim, and hello to Wild Weiss's readers, listeners. I am excited. There's a card game player I love named Brian Wong, old host of Limited Resources for Magic. He says, whenever you feel nervous before a tournament, you should say to yourself, no, that feeling that you're feeling isn't nervousness. That feeling is excitement. So I am channeling Brian Wong right now. I am very excited, Tim.
Right. So what I'm hearing is that you're just chomping at the bit to get out this, or are you chomping at the bit to find the place to exert yourself and be like, hi, I did it at minute 0 this time?
Ooh, I've got to save. It's what Tim is referring to is Tim is referring to my tendency that when one of his interviews goes live, I have already typed up a transcript of the juiciest parts of the interview to post on social media faster than should be possible based on the runtime.
Yep.
And the explanation for that is just I have a rat and there's no way that Tim's going to find it.
Okay, so it's Kevin. But I have a few other guesses at what it could be, but we'll get to that later in the show. But to hear that you're nervous / excited, it's good to know that I at least have some fans out there.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I'm a big fan. That's how you're supposed to introduce them. I'm a big fan, Tim.
You're a big fan. All right. So let's get into the questions. Sounds like we're warmed up and ready to go. So how did you initially get into Weiss Schwarz? What hooked you into this crazy fun cringe game of ours?
I had multiple friendly locals and some strong mentors. I don't think any person introduced me to Weiss. I assume that I saw Weiss mentioned on an anime subreddit or something.
Mm.
But in 2015, I bought a booster box and a trial deck each of Madoka and Fate Zero in English. Those decks were already dated by the time I had bought them. I think they were released in 2013 originally.
Yep.
So I was using the player aid inserts on the playmats and just playing both sides of the table like a nerd while watching that how to play Weiss Schwarz video from Weiss Schwarz UK.
Right.
That really short, excellent video, but I had to replay the video, I think maybe 50 times because part of their shtick is it's a lot of information densely compacted because they're talking quite fast. So I gave them a lot of views. My first local was in Austin, which is a college town, and I played my janky Madoka and Fate decks. But the people there were very nice. They accepted me as a regular pretty quickly. Austin is a bit peculiar because our locals at the time were often unpaid and top prizing, therefore, because there wasn't a buy-in. Instead, top prizing was that you got to change the Facebook banner to represent your waifu.
So literal waifu wars?
Yes, exactly. And that is the highest stakes possible. So it made my entry as a newbie very easy, that local, in that it didn't cost me an entry fee to play in local tourneys. And it was a very relaxing way to enter that game.
Right.
I really enjoyed we're immediately going to be talking about Tim's content instead.
Yes.
I love the story that you wrote about the Tsubame Gaishi triple trigger. Damn. I don't have any story that's quite like that, but I do have a story, an attempt at a story of a social connection that I made. Because in Houston, that summer when school is on break, I went back to, that's my hometown, Houston.
Right.
And by that point, I was able to play with a sort of real deck, which was Japanese Madoka. The new Rebellion set had just come out, so it has some good cards now. And Houston locals, most people outside Texas probably don't know the dynamic of Texas's Weiss cities, but I haven't been to San Antonio, so I don't know very much about that one, although I've played people from San Antonio. But the other three major
Question:
locals,
Where's
yes.
San Antonio?
San Antonio is sort of southwest-ish Texas. My
Okay.
hometown, of course, is Houston, which is southeast on the Gulf
Right.
Coast.
Okay.
I first started playing in Central Texas in Austin, but the other major local is Dallas, and Dallas is fantastic in northeast Texas. They've got locals like 5 days a week.
Ooh.
So any day of the week, basically, that you want to play Weiss, you can. I can't imagine that there is another city in North America as great for always being able to play with a full local every time.
Even Los Angeles?
Los Angeles, I know, has a couple locals, but I can't imagine they meet 5 times a week.
Fair enough.
Uh, so Dallas has to be up there on like the tier list. But as far as Houston and Austin, Houston is like in a family, the eldest kid who on which the parents set the highest expectations that they'll go places to be ambitious and they think this kid will accomplish something. Whereas Austin is the daydreamer who doesn't do that well in school and you just hope will be happy someday.
Ah.
So I did go to Houston locals, which at the time was much more competitively, I think, into the game than Austin. And I got to play against this player. And the way this person described it to me later is in the middle of a game against this person, I did something unthinkably powerful, something egregious, something forbidden. In the middle of the game, I asked him if I could look at his waiting room. And when I did that, that's the thing that caused Riaz Mohammed to decide that I was a person worth talking to about the game.
Wait. That's not a thing that's commonly done? We do that all the time in Calgary. Like that's standard procedure.
At the time in 2015, and I guess in the power level of the locals at the time, Riaz was astoundingly impressed. Riaz obviously went on to win 2 English World Championships, but back then when I met him, he was the most enthusiastic person about Weiss that I had ever met. So he and the rest of the Houston guys were very helpful. Houston's great. So I think those 2 locals definitely were nice to me for different reasons. They appealed to different parts of my growing, different kinds of mentorships. And obviously all the content creators back then, like the old Pojo forums and Peshkat's videos, Ninth Climax. I did the full tour of Weiss content, and I really enjoyed the dialogue and discussion about the game back then.
Yeah, it's definitely a shame that Pojo is kind of fallen off. Because like I don't think the Weiss Reddit has really stepped in to fully replace it at this point.
No, I don't think so. I think that there's something about forum architecture as a way of structuring conversations that is hard to replace in any other format. That Discord has tried to replicate this a bit with threads. The fact that you could just have a sticky place with a title, and then any content in that thread is about that topic. Forum architecture is just good. It's kind of weird as like a historical accident that we've moved away from forums as a way to talk about this card game. But I thought Pojo was really good for me to read people talking about the game.
It's very funny because I remember back in 2013 it was a lot of like 9CX. And the weird thing about Pojo is sometimes it was a bit hard to find archive threads, so I hope someone was out there just kind of keeping track of all of it.
Sure, the search functions on forums are maybe not so great.
Oh, I know. But you mentioned that you had several good mentors in and around the Texas scenes out in Houston and Austin there. And you mentioned Riaz by name. Is there anyone else that you'd like to give a quick shout out to?
Ooh, way back in that day, I mentioned Riaz because people know who he is.
Yeah.
But like Mike Lee and Echo from Austin definitely helped me along learning about the game. Lee has since gone on to other things. I love talking about the game with those guys for sure in Austin.
No, and it sounds like you guys have a heck of a community there. Moving on to kind of the next question, it seems like a very natural evolution given the story that you've told me here is what got you started with judging Weiss Schwarz?
The link here is community, I guess. There are a lot of different kinds of judges. There are like Magic the Gathering, I guess like any other card game, has a judge program enlisting players to help staff events and to be sort of leaders of local communities. And they have a nomenclature they made recently to describe the different psychographic profiles of judges, the different motivations that judges have.
Yeah.
Some judges are community bards who see themselves as social glue. Their job is to make sure everyone has a good time. Other judges are paladins who care about fair play, tournaments without cheating. And to some extent, I care about those things, but Weiss, I think, does a very good job in its design of appealing to the rules wizard in me. Just ignoring the Weiss rules are, like I guess any other card game, a mess to read and try to parse out and understand. Weiss presents itself as ordered and systemic. The card budgeting, the power that each good ability on a card costs power, and not just an arbitrary amount from card to card. It costs a specific amount of power that is written in some spreadsheet in Bushyroad's database. Or each downside on a card rewards a certain amount of power.
Mm-hmm.
I think Weiss appeals to people in the way that math might appeal to people who want black and white truths, the kind of truth that only exist in abstractions like math or in made up stuff like a card game.
Yeah.
So as far as like the system liker, the systematizer in me, judging is definitely something that I like about Weiss. But the second thing is just I'm a sucker for public service.
Same.
I have to imagine a lot of content creators share that sentiment, interest in duty. Like I love the Sasageo scenes in Attack on Titan. So I wanted to help Texas English regionals run smoothly, and judging seemed like the most straightforward way to do something for the community that I was liking a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and no, that's really cool to hear. And was it easy to get into judging, or is it a little difficult?
The actual rules part of judging is actually not that hard. Maybe partly because I like talking about the rules. Not just like the unintuitive squirrely stuff. Some other judges I know share that interest in the weird obscure edge cases like Chairman from California or Boats Don't Sink from southern US.
Yeah.
Those are two knowledgeable judges. They're also content creators. That's no coincidence that they share that public service bent. But the stuff that maybe is difficult is that your ability to judge is not correlated only with knowing the rules. It's not just about comprehension. For one, it's about fluency of delivery. When you judge an event, you need to be able to deliver a ruling persuasively enough that the players trust that you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
I don't know what experience you might have with judges or judging, but
I used to ref basketball.
And to give a ruling and you start botching it, and you know it, but you start misspeaking and misstepping in your explanation of the rule, and that leads to an appeal, and appeals slow down tournaments, and it's really bad. So part of your job as a judge is to master the rules in a way that allows you to deliver rulings persuasively. But second, and I think a lot of judges don't think about this enough, a lot of judges, when they take the judge test, like look over the comprehensive rules and make sure they understand that, but they don't spend as much time as they should on the floor rules, on the
Right.
equity side of the game, because your ability to make judge calls requires a sense of equity, because judge calls that cause game losses are bad because it means that players don't get to play their game.
Yeah.
That can be just as bad as an appeal. So because game state errors can be rewound, you need to make a judgment about how to rewind a game state error in a way that doesn't give an advantage to the person that created the game state error. You don't want to facilitate not cheating. What is the word?
Maybe we can flip this sentence around. You want to incent good, fair, conscientious, and sportsmanlike play.
Yes, I think that's a fair way to put it. And that kind of balancing takes more than just the bookish rules wizard stuff. That's context. That's a sense of fair play. That's the bard and paladin in the Magic the Gathering judge jargon. So I like that mix, and that the difficulty of that mix of both having the unemotional rulings of what's in the rules, but also tempered by, guided by confident delivery of the ruling and fair application of the ruling so that the game can proceed and people have fun, because that's what people are there to do.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, even if you are kind of definitely on the rules wizard kind of side, you're building a community, no matter how you really look at it. And this is probably something that I found really most difficult during COVID, where I just kind of said, you know what, we're not playing games. I'm doing a Invitational, screw it. And then just kind of jumped in on the deep end. It was very difficult. And I think playing over webcam and TTS made that even more difficult. Did you find that was the case?
Oh, for sure. Webcam Weiss adds a whole other layer of problems. For one, our muscle memory as judges has been built up over the years not being over webcam. So this means that you're looking for things that the things that your brain is thinking about when judging in person are just completely wrong when judging over webcam. And we had some notable examples these past 2 years, I suppose, of judges trying to become accustomed to that difference. When I head judged for the 2012 vintage tournament, the Legacy tournament retro for the Strictly Broken collaboration, between Strictly Broken and Dan's Ranch, I think.
And I think Nova TCG was involved as well.
Oh, I'm sure. For prizing, I think. They part of my priority was to make sure that judges and players who are accustomed to in-person didn't forget things just because they were now in a different environment of webcam. So I made a checklist. I was on a checklist bent for a while. This is boring.
Oh, checklists are sick.
I read a book about checklists context that this guy had was noticing a lot of errors in the surgery room. And so part of correcting that was to create a checklist for different kinds of surgeries. And then before the surgery begins, you go over the checklist with everybody in the room. So I made a checklist for judging Weiss. And the checklist involved what to look for at what point in the game state. So like at the beginning of clocking phase, check for what level and what colors are available this turn, so that for the rest of the turn, you are now checking back toward color and level. I made a checklist for whenever a person changes their deck, check that the bottom card doesn't show to the camera, check that the player can't see the bottom card, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Not necessarily thinking that these are hard to do. Like any one thing a person can do, a judge, they can look for it. This is easy. But because our muscle memory wasn't developed over these years to do webcam Weiss, I felt like a checklist like that was imperative to remind ourselves at each step of the turn what we needed to look for.
Yeah.
And in some ways, this was a lesson I learned from judging for Bushy Road regionals. Because an alternative answer I could give for what is difficult about judging Weiss is the fact that we are not professional salaried people. This isn't our job.
No, we're volunteers.
Correct. And part of the reason that this works, economically speaking, is that we are locally staffed volunteers, paid at not a fantastic wage for the ease of Bushy Road not having to fly in like professional people at all these events. That's just
Yeah.
more economically speaking, it's more doable because after all, these events are free.
Yes.
So you got to give that credit. But part of the cost there is you have people staffing an event with wildly uneven information, experience, comfort with execution of the event.
Yes.
Like Bushy Road does give out like a pamphlet or something online to tell you some information that you'll need to know about how a tournament is run and what you should be doing.
Yes.
But that doesn't come close. It does not come close to all of the minutia of what actually happens at a tournament and all of the little different like organizational prescriptions that you might break
Yeah.
unknowingly.
And
that's not to fully shit on Bushy Road, right?
no.
The fact that it's a free-to-play event means that some of these things are inevitable.
Of course. For the WGP series that Heart of the Cards puts on behalf of Bushy Road, they do have basically touch base with head judge in Rochester, New York.
Yes.
Would you like a system like that? Perhaps with a few paid official judges instead of make just everything running through poor Luke?
So that does like something like that would be fine so far as the head judge goes. But you still want maybe I haven't thought about this enough, but I imagine a system in which you have a head judge who is the final arbiter on rulings, but below that you still have grunts on the ground who will handle things before they get appealed. I can't imagine a way of working around that. That locally staffed people are still the way.
Oh, of course.
It's just that maybe you'd want to provide a little bit more resources, guidance, materials, like checklists, maybe. For example, doing a deck check, you might want to tell your deck checkers to not let the top 8 players take their deck with them from the table after you've checked the deck. Because that somewhat defeats the purpose, doesn't it, of doing the deck check if they can then take the deck back and do whatever they want with it, huh? But that sounds stupid. But
no, but it's easy to forget about, right?
Yes, it's easy to forget about. It's easy to be asked to do something and to not really know the big picture, and so you need some guidance on that to help you execute it if you're going to be managing impromptu volunteer staff people who are not consistently doing this as part of their job.
Yeah. And it's funny because all the major sports leagues in North America, and I think the Premiership League in the UK, have a structure like this where the officials are paid. So like in the NHL, for example, the ref makes the call, goal, no goal, or some other thing that's appealable. The coach can say, hey, no, that's bullshit. And then it goes to a arbiter in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's basically the sort of model you're going for here.
Yeah, I would want a model where even if you don't have professionally salaried people being flown all over the place, I just want a model where the staff is set up for success rather than set up for failure. And maybe with that, I will conclude my negative punching down on Bushy Road tournament organization.
All right. One of the first resources that I found and used heavily when I really started to get into competitive Weiss was the Weiss Almanac reading list. Can you run me through how that came to be?
The first draft of the reading list came from someone else named Licorice, actually. He had a paste bin, a raw text file just on the paste bin website that I stumbled across in 2016 because I was at the point I'd been playing, I guess, for a year at that point. So I was just searching terms into Google to see if something new comes up that I didn't know about yet, some new content creator, you know.
Yeah.
So I found that paste bin, and it was structured in a way that I thought was just brilliant to fit a player's learning curve. There were curated articles and videos categorized by subject matter, categorized by difficulty level, like rungs on a ladder to help a player along their journey to learn and eventually master Weiss. I didn't know who this person was, but I shared that paste bin whenever someone asked me for suggested reading. Someone says, I want general knowledge about this game. I want to learn how to get good at this game. I want to learn about this game. I would refer them to that paste bin. And from 2016 through to 2017, that was a great time for Weiss content. Now it's really good right now too. But I'm looking perhaps with somewhat rose-tinted glasses because that was the time when I started getting really, really engaged into Weiss, and when I actually started to become competent enough at the game to play at an okay level. That's 2017 was when I did okay with Kimono friends at JP Nationals.
Are we Kimono bros?
We are Kimono bros.
Hell
That's
yeah.
right. My build was weird jank, though. I played Dolphins. I didn't play the typical meta Japanese door standby. But yeah, Kimono friends for sure. That was my deck 3 years running, 2017, 18, and 19.
Yeah, same.
So that was a good time, 2017, and maybe it wasn't a golden age, but it was a really good age. A lot of content creators existed back then. They were making a lot of content that don't exist now anymore. Like Bren from, he was the Japanese language North American champion in 2015. His site, Climax Phase, he was making highly detailed, well-constructed articles on English decks like every 2 weeks or something throughout 2017 with occasional theory articles mixed in. Strictly Broken, that was their height, 2017. They had Connor's English Corner and Yarbocker's Brews on the Strictly Broken channel. Make Mark a Great, I think, is the best example of the sentiment I have about this time, which is Make Mark a Great did a Kazniver review, comprehensive, looked at all the decks, all the best cards. And Top Tier Tiers, who usually did every set deck review, decided to pass on that one. Top Tier Tiers said, there's no point. Make Mark a Great just did the best possible job, so we're going to skip this set.
Right.
I love that. Or when Make Mark a Great, they did their finishers article, and to lay down a premise, they cited my attack order article. They used my attack order article to set down the premise that attack order does not matter for optimizing damage.
Right.
Rather than replicate my work, they just link back to it. So 2017, I felt like was Weiss content as an ecosystem of creators responding to each other rather than being siloed off. And I say all of that, not just to be nostalgic, but because a year and a half passes during what I consider an excellent time for Weiss content creation. And during that time, this paste bin that I loved linking around was not being updated. There were all these rungs on the ladder that weren't being filled in.
Can you climb?
So I updated the list and I put it on WordPress site, and I credited Licorice with providing that starting point. I can't find the message history now, but I did find him later and I thanked him. And any day now, someone is going to send a message to me saying that I've been missing out on a few too many rungs in the ladder and the torch will pass on to somebody else. Who knows?
Gotcha. And that's not just going to be me saying, hey, put more of my stuff on there.
Yeah, you don't need to do that.
No.
That happens with no encouragement.
That's the one thing that's really nice about both the main list and kind of those periodic roundups you're doing is just the mix of, okay, here's some deck lists, here's moving up the ladder, and here's just bizarre stuff.
Yeah, it's the bizarre stuff that's best. I'm sad in part that the reading list is based around a specific philosophy of that rung on a ladder of self-improvement as a player and self-improvement as a content creator, self-improvement as a person. But that sometimes means that cool stuff doesn't fit into that kind of idea.
Right.
So the roundups that you mentioned, those were great for that. The roundups were a way to be able to highlight and signal boost content that I really liked, but didn't really fit as a self improvement model, because I was aware the content didn't fit there. And it was modeled after SCOTUS blog is a legal
Oh,
blog.
yeah, yeah.
They do legal commentary roundups on recent content written about the United States Supreme Court,
Mhm.
and I really love those. But writing sexy summaries to present content in its best light, to present a snippet of a conversation or a particularly good insight, to encourage people to watch or read something that they would not otherwise watch or read, that takes a surprisingly large amount of effort and time,
Yep.
at least to do it the quality that I wanted. So I think I did like 3 or 4 roundups before that became another project that I like, but not enough to keep doing.
Mhm. And it's funny because I know a lot of blogs, they really survive on that sort of link roundup style. So for the economists, Tyler Cowen's Marginal Revolution is very popular, where he
Mm.
just does a daily link roundup, and instead of like a little summary, it's just like a one liner, or maybe a few lines about what the post is about, and he does that every day. So Tyler Cowen is I forget what his official title is, but he's a tenured professor at George Mason University. So him and Alex Tarabach, who's also a tenured professor at George Mason, just run this blog. And then for psychology, you also have Astral Codex 10 now. It used to be Slate Star Codex, does a lot of these big link posts. And I think what's beautiful about them is, and you said it yourself, is they facilitate this conversation.
Yeah, it sounds like we're on exactly the same page about our like for the role that those curators play in connecting different pieces of content. I'm not convinced that Weiss needs it. I'm not 100% convinced, but
Really?
like to some extent, the major content producers for Weiss are on YouTube and then their own blogs. And I feel like there are some other avenues for rounding up content that are succeeding recently since the time that I stopped doing the roundups. For example, I could imagine Kevin runs some Discord channel bots that some people subscribe to in order to spread card of the day and Weiss Schwarz news. I could totally imagine like a Gazette feed or something where you could get your content added to like an RSS reader thing of Weiss content, exactly like that. That you could put your content into the feeder and it would spit it out to everybody else's Discord channels who subscribe to this Weiss Schwarz Gazette. And that could totally take the place of something that I do.
Well, at the same time, there's something that the machine can't do, and that's
Yes,
editorialize.
curation.
And curation editorialization is probably what makes these things valuable. And the other thing is it's very easy to Google index. And it's very easy for people who aren't part of these Discord channels, these Facebook groups that aren't part of the right Twitter
Yeah.
networks to find this content and then become part of these more dense but a bit harder to find networks. This sort of link blog serves a very good purpose. The other thing is it serves SEO
Yes.
by getting all these different nodes connected together. It pushes all the boats up.
Oh no,
So
Tim.
it's quite literally
No,
network
Tim.
effects.
Do not sell me on doing this.
What?
Oh no.
No, no. I am here to promote the content I like. Have you not noticed that I do this in
I
every
see.
interview?
Well, okay. Um,
I got Ken to promise me a Kaleidoscope article, which he still has not written. I think I got Taya to promise me something. You're up
yeah, I
next.
guess so. Yeah. Philip has been promising that Kaleidoscope article for since 2017, since that golden age. And part of what made that a golden age, if we were I were to think of it as a rose tinted golden age, is the anticipation of that mathematically calculated, guaranteed triple kaleidoscope. I'm still waiting for that. Yeah. Okay.
Well, it's like I really want to see how they would approach that because I have an idea of how you could calculate it, just kind of on my math background. But I remember from our conversation, it seemed like it was an incredibly technical
Yeah.
thing they did.
I had a couple conversations with Steven, who is the math guy behind the Make Mark a Great machine. He is cool, and he seems to he has a mastery of the numbers that my attack order article can is a caveman pretense in comparison. But yeah, I would love to see that stuff. Yeah, when those guys make the Prismatillion article, that's when I guarantee you'll see my roundup. This is the easiest promise I've made in my whole life.
Okay. Well, I guess it does it count as like me bending your arm to get something I want if it was something you were just going to do anyway?
I don't have
I don't think you can answer
I don't
yes
have
to
a
this, man.
response to that.
No response. No response. All right. Do you think you have any blind spots when it comes to certain types of voice content or media, depending on what it's about, what media it's on, that sort of thing?
I think as far as the reading list goes, 100% I know what the intentional blind spots are. That content outside the very specific self-improvement model. Like I love the King of Fighters lore video by Ryan the Lion. That's maybe one of my favorite pieces of Weiss content made on YouTube. And I'd love to see. I've encouraged him to make content like that for like Marvel. I imagine that there's a lot of stuff for that if he's a Marvel fan, whatever he knows about. I'd love to see more from him. And I'm glad I can point to that video, that lore video, as in a standard, aspirational standard for other content creators to match. But the content itself doesn't really serve as a rung on the ladder of any kind of mastery that I care about. Nor
Right.
does mastery of speculative investment, the mastery of how to exploit other people for your financial gain, doesn't appeal to me. So outside of basics, like should I buy a place set or should I buy singles, that isn't reflected in the reading list either. But I'm sure there are unknown unknowns, and like Donald Rumsfeld said,
Right.
I try to build my empathy. I try to explore other ways of thinking about this game, other ways of appreciating this game beyond my very Johnny Spike attitudes of self-expression through insular, weird edge case mastery. That's me. I like that kind of exploration of the game, but I'm at least aware that I gravitate towards certain kinds of content. So
Gotcha.
I'm always eager for people to tell me about parts of the game that to spend more time looking at. That's your cue, Tim.
Yeah, because we're going to tease something out of you here because we're trying out something we've never done on a Wild Wild Weiss interview before. Wild Wild Weiss in general. A real and true podcast game. And before you complain, rapid fire doesn't count. We're going to go live and make a reading list right here, right now. I'm going to give you a list of fake titles and descriptions of Weiss articles. You'll say yay, nay, and give me a reason why.
Okay. Yeah,
You good?
I am ready to win all the points in this game.
All right. Attack order matters. It makes a cogent argument. However, it is written entirely in a shift cipher. The title? Hereditary Mysteries of Weiss Schwarz.
Hereditary Mysteries shift cipher. Oh. Okay, I'm going to start off with a nay. I don't. Can you help me out here? A shift cipher, as in I have to use the code book to figure out what each word says.
Okay, so a shift cipher or a Caesar cipher is every letter is shifted by a set amount, and you use a slide rule to figure out what it is by trying to identify what the most common letter is and set that as E.
Well, that sounds like it's just one layer more difficult to read than my current attack order article, which is already extremely hard to read. So I should not I should not be so hard on this ciphered article. I'm still going to say no, though.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Attack order does not matter, however, is written entirely from the perspective of a 16th century Calvinist determinist. Attack order does not matter because God predetermined how you would attack.
That's a definite yay. That's great.
That's definitely yeah. Thank you. An article that argues playstyles are real and are the spice that makes Weiss fun. Written in the tone of philosophy, bro. Stop hating on your bros and crank out your own playstyle, dog.
Ooh. So I do state up front that I don't agree with every word that is written in the resources that I link. That sometimes articles that have some insights will go off the deep end or have something go wrong. And then I caution people not to read that part of the article. This probably, though, we get to the extent that every word I disagree with.
Is it the bro?
Oh, the bro is fine. I'm a bro. I think Tim might be referring to a hatred that I share with some of the top tiers people from back in the day about the word playstyle and how completely ineffectual a word and dialogue it is. That anything you can say about the game, you can say without using the word playstyle, and should.
Okay.
But I am so interested in this argument that I want to read it. So that's a provisional yay.
Provisional yay. I actually find that interesting because, like, as an economist, one of our most bedrock things is that preferences are immutable. So for me, naturally, because preferences are immutable, play styles naturally arise from that.
Oh, sure. Maybe what we're on is we might agree that the phenomena of playstyle exists, but the notion, the noumena, the way of talking about that thing that exists is completely useless.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. But damn, I might actually write this one now. A graduate level math treatment of whether you should play coin flip decks in Weiss Schwarz. Weiss is just a stochastic process applying novel Bayesian topographies to cards that rely on information behind an information set. Annals of Statistics 2021.
So I hate this, but this I would love to read this. I hate coin flips and most coin flips I hate in this game. But the coin flips that bother me the most are the ones that have no deck building warping effect. You might know the ones that run to hand if you reveal a card on top of the deck that is level 1 or higher. Whereas other coin flips have real deck building effects. This one you just put in any deck. And what's worse is that when you hit it the first time, that means you can keep chaining them together and keep hitting the second and the third. So I would love to hate that article. That's a yay.
That's a yay. Right. Because the ones that require maybe a level 2 or higher or hit a specific card, it's a lot more impactful. So did you just put that one in there just to carve out Kimono, friends? Because Kimono has a lot of coin flip in it.
Oh, sure. And all of them are level 2 or higher.
Yeah. So it's me and my 14 level zeros.
It is impressive. I don't know any other set. I'm pretty sure Kimono has 3 different coin flips in it. And that has to be more than any other one set deck that's out there.
Sneaker Bunko has a lot.
Yeah, I guess I'll have to go check. I want to keep my stat of Kimono Friends has the most coin flips of any deck, so I definitely have to verify that now.
Perfect. All right, so we're looking at 3-1, yay to nay. And the final, an article that is a caps lock rant begging for a Chihaya Furu set. Come on, Daddy Bushy, give me the Karata.
I love this this combination of references. So I definitely enjoyed. I don't remember which of your crew wrote the Chihaya Furu article. Was it you?
That was me.
Uh,
Who else writes just absolutely off the wall
Tim
shit?
could probably tell by how much I liked it that I watched Chihaya Furu, and it was surprising. It surprised me after clicking the link. I was thinking this is such a troll article, and there's no way this goes on the roundup. But I was definitely sold, and it earned its spot on that month's roundup. I remember being impressed by it. But secondly, the all caps, my good friend Uncle Butts from California. He has since, maybe the word graduated is wrong. He and Caps Lock have, what's the word you use when a couple is still friendly but they're not seeing each other anymore?
It's not estranged, right?
Right, it's not estranged. It's a little bit too hostile. But anyway, they're seeing other people right now.
Oh, they're on again, off again.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, it's complicated.
On again, off again is so good for Caps Lock. I think that has to be it.
Okay. Right. Click, click.
A Caps Lock Chihayafru article.
With title, Come On Daddy Bushy, Give Me the Karata.
Okay, this is a yay. But I will say that Caps Lock doesn't quite fit the tonality of Chihayafuru love article request as much as it does the Mr. Butts's tongue-in-cheek, like irreverent articles.
Of course.
But I think that's still a yay. I'm surprised, 4-1.
I mean, for a bunch of stuff that I just kind of threw together as I thought about it, like, that'd be funny.
I think what this says, though, is that there's a lot of great content that is to be made out there, and I want to read it. And even off the cuff, bad ideas, I think, could be worth making and worth reading. That is my takeaway.
Are you telling me that the perspective of a 16th century Calvinist is not important for Weiss?
That had to have been the yay. I hope so.
I think that might have been a yay.
Yeah.
That had to be a yay. I think your nay was the shift cipher.
Yeah, you're right.
It's just too obtuse. I'm glad that we got to also hit on the deep lore.
There's a lot of deep lore to Weiss content. I think someday people have written histories of the game, like especially histories that look at the deck, that create a narrative about Weiss from the perspective of the most powerful cards, the meta decks, the bans. I would love a narrative about the game. This is way too self-indulgent.
All right, let's
But
go.
I would love a narrative. I would love a narrative of the game from the perspective of like the community and how over the years different platforms on which people connected to talk about this game. I'd want to hear sagas about foreign and global and Pojo and the Discords. Someday, at the time when Riaz Mohammed becomes a household name and everyone across North America knows who he is, that's when we'll need stories written about the social history of Weiss.
Oh, so Weiss Schwarz, A People's History. Thanks for the name, CBC. Suckers. Oh, sorry. There was a very long-running documentary about hockey done by the Canadian national broadcaster, Canada Broadcasting Corporation, called Hockey, A People's History. I somehow ended up with the book they wrote. I don't remember ever buying it. But yeah, we could do a 10-parter. It'll be great. Put it on like that point of PBS nobody's actually still watching.
Right, yeah. Yes, that's right. We'll find a time slot for it. It'll work.
Yeah. All right. Getting away from the reading list and deep lore, you mentioned that you have a Japanese Weiss cube. Can you explain to players what a cube is, how it works, and whether it's a pain in the ass to play Japanese Weiss cube?
Right. So there's a 2-minute version of this topic, and it can range anywhere from that 2 minutes to 4 hours. I love talking about cube. Cube is what I think about most in a Weiss context nowadays. Cube is a way of playing a card game with a reusable sealed pool of cards. Players build decks from them, most often by drafting them, but there are alternate ways to use a cube to make a deck. By passing pre-built packs rather than buy packs. You just pass made packs from that pool of cards around the table, picking cards, and you build a deck, and then you play it. And then afterward, the cards go back into the pool to be used again next time. And a lot of card games try to adapt their rule set to accommodate a cube because there's a lot of fun about it. There's a lot of fun in deck building, but this isn't sad. This is just inevitable. But decks get refined and solved, and metas get solved, and then now you have a deck, and you don't get the building part anymore. You just get the playing part. But Cube can offer again and again that fun, that magic of, especially the scrappiness of pulling together a deck, because this might be getting too in the weeds, but part of what I like about Limited in Magic and part of what I like about Cube is the lower power level means you get to experience some of what it was like to play this card game when you were first starting. Like when I first started with just a trial deck and one booster box and hacked together to try to upgrade this terrible trial deck at the time. Trial decks were so bad that long ago. But this terrible trial deck with some attempt at an upgrade and none of the cards actually work together. There's a magic there. There's a fun in that unrefined part of the game. And Cube lets you go back to that time.
It also just lets you see what other weirdness was printed in these sets that, yeah, it's not meta, but it's just funny.
That's right. You get to play cards in an environment that suits them at a power level that suits them outside of the context of their original decks, where maybe they didn't have a home back then, or you wouldn't play those cards because you didn't play that set, even though it had a cool card in it. But now you can just bring it out of that set, let it play alongside new friends in a new context.
Right.
That is a great part about Cube.
Yeah, so can you just kind of give us a rundown of how you structure the cube? Like how many cards do you need to have a cube, and what are you looking for when you build one?
So I don't want to wholly retread for anyone. Yeah, so anybody who wants to learn about Cube, Wild Weiss already did a great episode about the goals of creating a cube, some things to think about, and some of the reasons to build one. And so not to wholly retread it, you are designing a play environment. Usually, like some people build cubes just as a creative exercise, more for display and collection than to actually play, and that's fine. But if you're building a cube for it to be played, then you're thinking about a lot of different things. One is variance. Most cubes are singleton, partly because there's a sexiness and allure to there being only one of each card in the cube, but also because it increases variance. It means that it is hard to have the exact same deck every time you play. And that's part of the fun. If you end up playing the same deck over and over again when you cube, then you're kind of departing from the purpose of cube in the first place, which is to recapture the magic of a new deck building experience every time.
Yeah.
So that variance extends not just to the singleton, which for the most part you want to consider only having one of each card, but it also extends, yes, to the cube size. So the bigger your cube pool, some people build cubes in certain games with exactly enough cards to reflect the number of cards that were picked by players. So in assuming that you want to stick to 50 cards, like I said, this could be a 4-hour long discussion. But so assuming that you want to stick to 50 card decks and don't want to shrink the card's deck size, which is something you might consider doing, and I'm experimenting with it myself. Assuming that you want to do that, and you also want to give people like 15 extra cards wiggle room in case they pick bad cards and don't want to play them, then you'd have like 65 cards per person, and you multiply that by the number of people or something. Or 75 cards if you want to be super generous. And then you could, however many number of cards, multiply that by the number of people, that's your minimum cube size. If you have a pool of 8 people who want to play or something, then you just multiply the deck size plus extra sideboard times 8. But If you want more variance, that is, if you don't want every card to be in the pool every time, if you want sometimes for people to not get there and see every card that's in your pool, then you can increase the card pool. And some people, I know Weiss Cube had a massive cube pool. I think maybe if he had 8 people drafting, he had basically another 8 people's worth of cards still sitting in the box.
Beauty.
While this kind of variance might annoy some people, fair enough, that they pick a card that combos with another card and that other card's not even in the cube pool right now. It's in the box still. That's a sacrifice in order to make each play experience different. I'm just waiting for you to tee up something else, Tim. Like I said, I can keep going forever.
I just like talking about cube.
I do love talking about cube.
Because in Calgary, we built a Pokemon cube on top of our Weiss cube.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I realized that I had all of my childhood Pokemon cards sitting around from base set.
Wow, base set. That's a far reach back.
Yeah, we did a cube that just goes base set to fossil.
That's the prime time for sure.
I mean, we took out a lot of the just absolute awful stuff to play because there is some stuff that is just like pure anti-fun.
And that is something we're thinking about, is that when you're the curator of a cube experience, you're curating it not for your personal enjoyment that a card is in there, but in order for people to have fun playing it. So you have to decide cards get cut or put in just to make the play experience better, not just for you to feel good that the card's there.
Has there been any Weiss cards that are just straight up anti-fun? One that I can imagine is Kaban.
Definitely. So for a while, I had a student council shell in the cube. I guess it's worth saying, first of all, that each cube experience is different. They're aiming for different things. For example, Weiss Cube is playing around for people who, some people have played Weiss Cube. I don't know why I think I talk about Weiss Cube a lot because he developed his cube around the time that I was thinking about developing mine in late 2018. And he was already playing it by the time I figured out that it existed. And I got to play it and I got to learn a lot of like lessons in advance based on mistakes he had made and then corrected and shared with me. So I got a,
right.
I stand on the shoulders of giants or whatever. So
that's fair.
So his cube is 2012 Weiss. It is fundamentals on the board. Climax combos are terrible. Sometimes you only attack twice a turn because you don't have the hand to attack a third time. And slamming climaxes just isn't a thing because the cost to do so is too big. You don't have the hand.
Prohibitive.
So that's 2012 Weiss. My cube is different. It's more modeled about the kind of play experience I had when I first started playing the game, which was when climax combos were good and it wasn't totally inting to build a deck around climax combos. Partly because I think climax combos are fun. Like any new player, the thing that they gravitate toward is climax combos. Whereas any competitive player, especially between 2012 through like 2016, they know that it's a total trap to build around climax combos. You just put in 8 plussing triggers. And if there happens to be a good combo that pairs with the plussing trigger, you play that. But building on climax combos is for waifu decks or whatever during that time period. So I wanted to make the fun thing good. So my cube is built around making climax combos a not total misplay to draft around. So I had to do a lot of accommodations to make that happen. For example, I broke singleton for climaxes. There's 2 of every climax in my pool.
Oh.
I added a climax swap rule that rather than have to play a character with the text on play, pay 1, discard a climax, salvage a climax from waiting room, I just added that as a rule to the game that at the beginning of your climax phase, you can climax swap for a climax that matches a character you're going to combo with. These changes are fairly well received, and they create the play patterns that I want out of a cube, or out of my cube anyway.
Although the one thing I can see that would be very funny, given that you've put 2 copies of each climax in there, is I could just be like, you know what? I'm playing 8 comeback triggers. My deck's going to be mega consistent. Screw you, nerds.
Yes. So I definitely like that there are 2 alternative like routes to go with that respect. That you can still play good stuff's 8 climax triggers, 8 plussing triggers, or you can lean into that part of the game that captured our imagination when we first started as newbies and play forward climax combos without it being a total disaster. That you can actually still win.
Right.
The other thing about my cube is not only does it offer that different play experience of do I do plussing triggers or do I do combos, but traits are a major factor of my cube, whereas it's much de-emphasized in other kinds of cube environments. Partly because I have access to the JP card pool. Because my card pool is so much bigger, I don't have to try as hard to find interesting cards. So I get to focus my slots in the cube on certain traits. So I try to support, I have somewhere between 5 to 7 traits, and some of them are the predictable ones, like music, magic, weapon. But the great boon to a JP card pool is anniversary trait is really cool.
Oh my
Anniversary
God.
trait is Sword Art 10th anniversary, Key 20th anniversary, and Circus de Capo. And all those cards have the same trait, anniversary, along with most of those cards have secondary traits. So they might secondarily have magic, or they'll secondarily have student council or weapon or whatever.
Right.
And that
BRB telling Plat Plat he's wrong about English Cube.
So JP Cube has some definite advantages in that because the cube is a bit bigger, because you have access to some dual traded sets like all the anniversary sets, Sympho Gear, all those cards are music weapon for the most part, except for Hibiki, the yellow ones. Sympho Gear cards are music and weapon, so they work in both decks, those cards. Those cards are live picks for either a person going heavy into music or a person going heavy into weapon. And a card that synergizes with either of those traits works with that card in their deck. Nanoha cards are for the most part traded magic and weapon. So you get access to those dual traded sets that don't exist in English. That's one of the upsides. The obvious downside is the obvious downside is you cannot read Japanese cards unless you know Japanese, and it is way too much of a burden on people to require them to play with cards that they don't know. So if you were to do this online, like on Tabletop Simulator, you could use image editing software to put onto the image of the card in Tabletop the translation of the card. That's one way to do it online. For in-person play, I suppose you could do proxies similarly, but I'm insane, so I printed inserts for all these cards.
How long did that take? Did you at least have a paper cutter?
It's pretty it's uncomfortable for me to talk about how long that took. I listened to podcasts, sometimes Weiss podcasts.
I get it. However, you're dodging the number.
Oh, I'm sure hours and hours. It's quite silly.
We want to know how much of a madman you are.
It's a multi-step process of grabbing the translation insert PDF and then taking a snapshot of that insert from the PDF and putting it into a Word doc, and then converting it into a PDF that you print, and then you have to cut out with scissors every insert. It is stupid. Part of the appeal, though, I will say, of having a Japanese cube is that I know that I can offer play experiences with cards that other people will not be able to offer, even if they do it at their own cube, because nobody is stupid enough to do this for Japanese, except for me. So I can offer a play experience that maybe other people wouldn't.
Gotcha. And that's definitely a comparative advantage you have there.
Yeah, I'd say so. Although English,
does it have Action Common?
You can definitely So yes, Action Mask was recently unrestricted. I do have plenty of cards in the cube pool that are banned or restricted in their own list, and they're exciting. Part of the appeal of putting them in is they're exciting to pull. That's something you have to think about, is your power level distribution. How much more powerful do you want the best card to be compared to the weakest cards? That's a decision you have to make. Even if you don't think you're making that decision, you are, because the cards that you put in that are the best are going to be the ones that are going to be pick the most, they're going to dictate the flow of games. They're going to dictate the outcome of games. So when you are picking powerful cards, you're picking how you want games to go. So as you guys discussed, there are some cards that are powerful and have play patterns that aren't very fun, like universal, non-trait restricted salvage brainstorms. Those aren't fun because the play pattern in play is they can grab anything, whereas other people are trait restricted. And the play pattern in drafting is also boring because there is no decision to make here. They're not only highly powerful, but they go in every deck and they're usually level zeros, so there's not even a color restraint. I've considered putting in a level 2, a 2/1 salvage brainstorm as like an experiment to see whether it being only accessible at level 2 and it being color restricted might be enough to make it not that high a pick. I might try that. There's some rest salvage brainstorm that's a level 2 out there. I forget which set has it. But anyway,
I know Lucky Star has one that's a draw at level 2.
But anyway, all this, yes, Lucky Star has some cool cards.
It's a beautiful set. My wife played it at WGP the other day.
Wow, it's representing.
Yeah, I think it's one of the stream games for the Calgary WGP.
Lucky Star has in my cube the Hiyori that can modify the trait of any card at the cost of a stock. So far, it has not done anything. It's in there with the hope that someday somebody will break something by giving something a trait that it didn't have before. But
you know what would work in your cube from Lucky Star?
Yeah, what?
There's the other Hiyori 0/0. You can play her. When you play her, you ditch out a climax and rest a character and Hiyori, and then you can free play a character of the level that you rested.
Yes, I recall the card. I recall the card. It's something like that. My recollection is that it was always picked last and never made it into decks, partly because I think not only the rest 2 cost is prohibitive, but the climax discard cost is somewhat prohibitive. That rest costs are
like
premium.
The whole Lucky Star.
Yeah, like I guess like all of Lucky Star, that it's a problematic card. I think all this started by you asking about Kaban, and yeah, that was an anti-fun card. It is good and it doesn't create fun play patterns. And unlike like normal Weiss, where if a card is fun, you have to just suck it up and do your best to play around it. When you're the creator of a cube, you just cut the card. And now it doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
So that's something. Action Mask, though.
Yeah.
I think that might play fine. That might play okay. But unfortunately, it's not traded very well for my cube. I don't think it has any relevant trade on it. But maybe that
green.
But maybe
there's a lot of things that search green.
But maybe it is okay. It is okay to have unsearchable but fun and powerful cards in the cube. So that might still be worth putting in.
Although he's going to be impossible to find now.
Like now that it can be a 4 of, and that just means that any supply of it gets sucked up. I totally agree.
Well, to be fair, when it was announced that he was coming off the ban list, some of us went a little hard in the Calgary Weiss Schwarz Discord, and someone, not actually me, but someone might have posted a full page-sized ASCII art of Action Common into the chat.
I'm a fan. His place on that list undeserved.
Unjust. Crayon Shinchan meta, let's go. All right, now that I've completely derailed the cube discussion, I got us back onto Neo Standard. How about that? In a private discussion, you mentioned you weren't the biggest fan of Neo Standard as a format. Can you run us through why and maybe some remedies you'd have for the format?
This is definitely a kind of question that pairs well with my sentiments about Cube, in that all the excitement that I have about Cube is partly a symptom of how I feel about the main format that we play in Weiss. Because I want a reason to care about new cards. And I want to tap into the original sales pitch for Weiss, which was that it's an anime fan battle where different animes get to play together. At the outset, though, just to get out of the way, Bushiroad does a lot of things right. Especially a lot of things that you wouldn't think about. One example that I don't think anybody but me, the nerd, talks about is why stock is a hidden zone. Because there are a couple different hidden zones in this game. The deck is a hidden zone, hands is a hidden zone. But stock also is a hidden zone, and you might wonder why. And my understanding as like a pretend designer of a cube, right, is that stock is not open because Bushiroad wanted to make it an ordered zone to create interesting decisions about paying stock out. They wanted you to have to decide, do I really want to pay 3 stock so I can get the climax out, or is it going to stay buried? So we start from that premise that Bushiroad wanted to make stock an ordered zone. So if you're going to make stock ordered, and then you consider whether it's going to be visible or closed. If it's visible, players are going to be looking through it to look at cards in that zone because they want to see what is the 4th card down, what is the 5th card down. But every time a player does that, there's a necessary hypervigilance from the other player to make sure you're not doing anything funny, to reorder the cards in that ordered zone. That doesn't appear in any other zone. Like, even though clock is an ordered zone, and theoretically might face the same problem, there is nowhere near that often an interaction with putting things into clock and taking things out of clock. When things come out of clock, it's usually a very discrete, obvious thing like I'm healing now, or I'm leveling up now. And there is hypervigilance there about did you level up the right amount. But if stock were visible, it would just be a headache. So I think that is a major reason why stock is closed. So Bushiroad gets things right with its design decisions in ways that aren't even obvious. And secondly, Bushiroad is fine in the sense that there are multiple ways to play this game, even if there's only one format, quote unquote. Like, people play waifu decks and express themselves with waifu decks, and they express themselves with competitive decks, and they express themselves with jank. But Neo Standard as a main format kind of sucks. It means that I don't get to care about most new releases because in Neo Standard, you can only play with certain releases that are meant to be played together. Whereas in other games, when something new comes out, I care because maybe I'll be drafting that set, or I care because maybe it's Vanguard and each new set has new cards from multiple different clans or nations or whatever, not just a solo set only dedicated to one. So engagement, I think, with new releases is pretty low for Weiss. And there's little incentive to keep up with, engage, talk about new cards that you don't intend to play yourself. Outside the spikiest of competitive players, and even for them, they are encouraged, they're incentivized to wait to talk about and think about new cards because a meta list will eventually solve that deck. And why should you learn and talk about 100 new cards in the new set when you can wait for the meta deck to solve itself and then you only have to learn 10 or 15 new cards? And the fact that content creation is already hard for such a niche game, but when you have content, interest, and engagement fractured in your player base, that already fairly small player base fractured based on whether they're interested in that particular set or not, that is awful from a content creation perspective.
It's not a way to grow.
Yes, that it definitely stifles the growth of content creators because at any particular moment, if you're making content about a certain new release, your target audience is not all of Weiss. It's the fraction of Weiss that happens to be interested in that one set. Think about from an esports perspective too. So StarCraft, Brood War, there are 3 main civilizations, 3 main kinds of player choices you can play, right? Like there's the humans and then there's 2 different varieties of aliens, okay? In any given match that you watch competitive StarCraft on, if you're a player who plays StarCraft and you play one of those 3 races, there's a decent chance that your race is on screen because there's only 3, right? StarCraft commentators, StarCraft content creators are totally aware of this because they're aware that mirror matches are more boring to watch. But part of the reason that viewer count on mirror matches is lower is that it's humans versus humans, which means all the alien race players aren't engaged because their race isn't on screen. Multiply that by a factor of 100, and that's Weiss. Because somebody uploads a match of ReZero versus Data Live or whatever. For me to be engaged optimally, I need to be a player of ReZero or Data Live.
Right. And then it gets even worse if it's something stupid niche like Macross Frontier versus, I don't know,
Right.
Rene.
So Bushiroad compensates for this, right? This fracturing of player engagement by having a very rapid release schedule. And sure, that is one way to go. Is you release many sets so that hopefully over the course of a year they give you something to care about. Cool, fine. Part of why I still get engaged with the game is that my interest in Cube means I care about new releases more than I ever have. Like when Zombieland Saga was coming out, everybody was looking at the obvious text in the card, but I'm the one who notices that it has music as a secondary trait, which means it can go in my cube. I can, right? Or when Dragon Maid Kobayashi is going to come out, and we have a PR previewed, and it's confirmed that it has Dragon trait, and now I can go back and look at my old Shining Resonance cards to see how many of them work with dragons, and maybe that could be enough to create a dragon shell for the cube. Maybe Student Council comes out one draft, and in comes Dragon, right? Very much like old Standard, I imagine, that kind of engagement that I get with new releases that other people maybe don't. So as far as how to fix it, I would love for a format in which I get to care about new releases interacting with other releases. Like my dream format would be something like mini standard trios, where your team, you get a team of 3 people, like just like trios, and your team chooses 3 neo standard card pools, and those 3 card pools are combined into one big card pool that's like standard, but it's just those 3 sets. It's a mini standard, and the players share that. And maybe the most boring teams, okay, would just make 3 meta decks, and they would slightly tweak them to borrow cards from other people's card pools that are a little bit better, and change nothing about the deck core and just change the peripheral cards. But okay, those are the boring people. But I imagine there's a lot more room for engagement with other releases to create something fun and a different room and habitat for cards to be in, a different lens to evaluate cards, a different home like Cube, without the brokenness that is Standard, because Standard is just unfixable. But maybe something more small, a mini Standard, that might be not broken enough to be real.
I wonder if you could do something like Modern, where you take like a 3-year cutoff.
Sure. That's another way to do it. You can look at time cutoffs like Modern. I imagine that some people might do like year-long blocks where I'm playing 2017 because that's obviously the best meta 2017. There have got to be ways to make cards be used and appreciated in ways that are not just neo standard.
Yeah, because like my background's a Pokemon player, so I used to mostly play Standard because Expanded was busted. So Pokemon has 2 real formats and 1 not a format. So Standard is your blocks. So every year, usually about 5 sets at the tail end of your block get dropped into Expanded only, and then you just keep going forward with the new sets. Expanded is everything from Pokemon Black and White on. And they picked Black and White specifically because tail end of Diamond and Pearl, there was consistent first turn win decks that were so bad that they had to do a emergency rotation. Like in the middle of the season, they rotated out sets to just get rid of this deck that was hilariously consistent. So there was literally 2 decks in the format. There was the turn 1 win deck and the deck that would win turn 2 if the turn 1 deck failed. So it's like, I really appreciate the problems that Standard has because Pokemon had them in a rotation format.
There is something to be said though about can I ask one more question about the Pokemon format you were envisioning? Did the solitaire, in order to achieve the turn 1 win, how long would that take to happen? Like the mechanical.
5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes.
Basically, what would happen is you would have a card that you had 4 copies of a card that guaranteed you went first. There was the way Pokemon works is there's 3 ways to win a game. You can make it so your opponent has no more Pokemon, you take 6 prizes, or your opponent decks out. Those are the ways you win the game. So you go first. There was a Pokemon called Sableye that could attack. You could attack first turn in this format for some reason. He had an attack that did 60 damage to basic Pokemon, if I remember correctly. And then normally there's these very powerful item like event cards called supporters that you can only play one supporter per turn. And there was a supporter called Seeker, where both you would pick up a card from your bench and your opponent would pick up a card from your bench and put it into your hand. And finally, there was a very easy way to recycle supporters so you could play multiple supporters in a turn. Do you want to guess how big the biggest basic Pokemon was
At the
hit point
at
wise?
the time, 180. I don't know.
At the time, what people were playing, the highest you had was 60
I see.
that people were generally playing. So
You're right. My expectations for Pokemon size is very off given nowadays what I see people do. I see.
what you had some cards back in the day that you would have like 90 to 120 hit point basics. But what you saw a lot of play is like there was ways to get Sableye above those numbers,
Sure.
but it degenerated to a point where it didn't.
Well, I will at least give credit that it sounds like those terrible games ended quickly.
Yes. It was basically what would happen is people wouldn't play the games. The Sableye player would check the top card of his deck, show the fast ticket from his hand, which guaranteed him go first, show the Sableye, pick up the deck. It was that bad. Because just him going first meant he won.
Right.
And I don't think Standard even has that.
No. Instead, in Standard, you have 30 minutes of a person moving
Recursion.
cards around different zones until finally a win condition is achieved. I guess what I was leaning towards, that's arguably worse. I don't know.
I'm not sure which is actually worse, but it's like I think Standard can be rehabilitated.
Okay.
And I actually want to get your opinion on it, given that you're a cube curator, you're a judge. The first thing I think you need is a dedicated overhaul of the ban list.
Right.
Just to make sure that you get rid of, because there's specific key cards that enable all the infinites.
Right. Yes, there are. And if Bushiroad ever wanted to rehabilitate Standard, it would have to start with that for sure.
And I think you go for probably a 4 or 5 year rotation, just so there's enough cards to do something interesting, but you still need to pull new cards in.
I imagine the sales pitch. One of the sales pitches that players often use to get people into Weiss is the non-existence of a rotation. That's part of the appeal. But I imagine you'd still be able to.
Well, I think you keep Neo Standard.
Right. The fact that Standard is the only form that would affect rotation, I don't think hurts that sales pitch too bad. So I don't think I'd be too worried.
No. Yeah, and then I think the last thing you would probably need to do, actually, I think it might just be those two things. And maybe if we want to get spicy, maybe drop things down to max 3 copies of a card.
Wow. There's some
because then it forces players. It removes some of that consistency, which makes actually harder to set up these infinite combos, and it also forces players to pull in more cards.
Yes, the genius part about that is it means it's very difficult to just take a meta Neo Standard deck and just straight port it into Standard. It forces you to stretch out into other places. I like that idea.
You know what'd be cool? If we just set up like Standard 2, did a few experimental tournaments, just do it online.
Yeah, that sounds like the kind of thing
that'd be cool.
It's on my wish list for for the there are some tournament organizers that out of the goodness of their hearts they create for the community. They create tournaments. So that'd be on my wish list eventually, is a modified Standard to make that happen for sure.
Yeah. So a bit of Calgary background is I've run multiple just stupid for the fan tournaments, which is weird side brackets. So 2020, I did the Road to the Invitational, which was an NFL style, well, more NHL style regular season with playoffs. The first Invitational, we did just a standard Neo Standard tournament for the first part, and the side bracket was sealed Haruhi. $30 buy-in. You got a box of first set English Haruhi. Build a deck.
I drafted Haruhi in English, and
It's such a good sealed set.
it was surprising how in that environment that the card balance actually a lot of cards become relevant that you would be totally surprised to be relevant. Like 2/2s are very strong in that kind of environment, and then there's an event that kills level 2s, and that becomes good. So yeah, I imagine sealed Haruhi. That's fun. Cool.
No, sealed Haruhi was great, and it was just because I was able to get a deal from the local game store, and that made it so it's like, okay, 30. I think people, if they're willing to walk away with a box of Weiss Schwarz, they'll do a $30
Right.
buy-in.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and there's like a bunch of like weird tournaments that I'd love to try. And I think I might use the Invitational series for it, but I think for something as experimental as Standard 2, it would probably be best served online with a more competitively inclined group if they'd be interested to do it. I think, you know what, after this episode comes out, I might actually just start a sign up for that.
I can agree that you'd want it to be limit tested. Whatever new attempt to rehabilitate Standard, you'd want people to try to break it in order to show where the weaknesses are in the attempt to rehabilitate it, for sure.
Yeah,
which encourages a large player base. Yes, something online.
Yeah, like something online, people testing it. Yeah, and then it kind of centralized testing, writing about it.
I will say that.
Should we call it Standard 2 or Calgary Standard?
I love that. It is totally fine. It's good for formats to be named after community. So Calgary Standard sounds fantastic. I know that though that whenever I talk about my desire for cards to have homes outside Neo Standard, for cards to be evaluated and appreciated in different kinds of formats, the cautionary tale that smart people, conscientious people have told me is that it can be kind of annoying to be building a deck, buying a deck for the main format right now, Neo Standard, and then it turns out some uncommon that you need 3 of turns out to be a standard staple, and it's $20 for no reason. There is something stressful, and there's a tension in having multiple different sources of demand for the same card that I'm sure people familiar with the increase in price for SPs can appreciate. So that is something we're thinking about, but I don't think that takes away from the good that comes from player engagement if we had more ways to use the cards than we do now.
Of course. And I think it's funny because Pokemon and Magic the Gathering both just said, you know what? We're going to have all these sanctioned formats. Go for it. And I think if they're doing that, especially in like a game like Magic, where the market is very dense, probably like efficient market hypothesis type efficient, and Pokemon where people are buying chase rares just because haha Charizard, and they can still support multiple formats, I think that's proof positive that benefit outweighs cost.
I think we're on the same page there.
Yeah. All right. Birth of Calgary Standard. Let's go. With how long you've been playing Weiss, you've watched the games change quite a bit. Have you appreciated the direction the game has evolved?
There is a danger that my answer to this is just a word salad of just the things that I like. Because on a micro level, I like a lot of what Bushiroad has been doing. I like how much support that Bushiroad has given to the non-red triggers. Anybody who's been trying to build competitive decks before, choice trigger was aware that it was hard for Bushiroad to push non-red cards to be good, especially non-red climax combos. And competitive deck diversity and solving sets was not as cool as it is now. Now Bushiroad can push cards by pairing them with the new choice triggers or by giving them pushed back row synergies like the Kirito Spriggan pant support or the Sakura Fate Brainstorm that procs with door or bar triggers.
And I wish book trigger proc change in Kimono Friends had better
Oh
support.
yeah,
That was cool.
I think that is cool. I like that Fox.
Yeah.
So I think they are doing on a macro level a lot of things fine or good. Like for a stretch of 2020, there were a string of underpowered duds. Sakura Wars, Key 20th, Lost Decade. That was a sad time. But now there are a lot of other people who are much more competent to be able to talk about what I'm going to say. So I'm just going to keep it short. That sets are often tournament viable nowadays on release and get played on release. So that's cool. But on a macro level,
Neo Standard just takes away the deck building.
on a larger macro level, yes, everything that we've said you could just copy paste here. And I also think Bushiroad has been trying to stop the game from taking too long to play, and to some measure it succeeds. A lot of their ban lists are targeted. We saw with the 2020, ban list against Fate and Kimono Friends that
Yeah.
they are very sensitive to the fact that this game can take a very long time to play, but it is maybe unsatisfying that there's no way to fix that problem. So in some ways, like the game has changed, but in that the game has bigger card flow, more stacked card effects on the same card, like better distribution of power to make solving sets more interesting. A lot of good things. But on a macro level, it's the things that can't change that are maybe what I don't appreciate, the stuff that I am not satisfied with. The fact that, I don't know, why aren't there new card types? I don't know. Like, we've had characters and events and climaxes, right?
Yeah.
It seems like you could make new card types. It seems like, I don't know, level 4 cards might be weird and cool. That could be early play to level 3 or a second deck. I don't know, like in Vanguard. It seems like
it's very conservative the way they have built Weiss Schwarz.
Yes, that is exactly the word, Tim, is conservative. That there is a system to Weiss that works really well, really fun. The compression as a system, the entire lanes of combat system, like there is something really well designed about the game. But they are very conservative in not deviating from that original conception of how this game plays, to the point that every deck, this is not an original thought. Everybody says this, but every deck plays using the same tools, the same fundamentals of soul counts, of field, and of resource conversion, and they all do the same thing. And some people describe that as every deck plays mid-range, every deck has the same tools, every deck has the same card effects, but with flavored slightly differently. And I don't necessarily have that much of a problem with it because I think Weiss is fun. I think those fundamentals, soul counts, field, resource conversion, are fun. I enjoy it. But
Yes, this is my probing question. What would a Weiss deck that has just a straight up different win condition even look like? The only thing that I've seen that's like a separate win condition that I can think of is Doctor Strange from Marvel, and that's a set
right,
that hasn't really
that
hit. Like the deck refreshes, so there's like destroying cards is not an option. Like pretty much every other situation pushes you to forcing your opponent to run out of cards. Memory is a bonus, not a demerit. So you can't do like if your opponent has X many cards in memory, they lose a la Lost World and Pokemon. So it's like I'm just trying to think of what alternate win condition decks could be in Weiss Schwarz.
sure. I think that's a really cool idea of banishing as many cards into memory as possible as a win condition, and you have a card in your own memory that checks for how much memory the opponent has for the win. You could imagine new card effects that push you toward a win condition without winning lanes, like that deal damage not as a character on the field. Like I'm definitely not a game designer. I'm just a pretending one because I make a cube.
Right.
I use somebody else's game design and then I make a subsetted format of it that's slightly modified with different rules. But even though I really like this game and I really love the community around the game, it is just weird that the game, not that the game has changed so much, but instead that the game has stayed the same so much. That's the really weird thing.
Yeah, because we've been going since 2017 and sorry, 2017, 2007, thereabouts, and just not much has really changed structurally. Like going back, like Yu-Gi-Oh has just invented so many card types, sometimes to their detriment. Even Pokemon's added like fields and equip, and that's okay. Sidebar. That is the thing that pissed me off the most about Lost Decade. And as much as it was
The
funny to bully Lost Decade with Macross Frontier on stream for any Evo, that deck should have been good because then we would have gotten a new profile for future decks in equip items.
For sure, we would have had a template for a markedly, pun intended, way of how a deck play patterns. That would have been exciting. But they dropped the ball on that.
Yeah. And I'm just hoping that maybe Marvel brings some of that back with like Thor's hammer and Captain America's shield and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's
Mm-hmm.
there's hope. It's probably not happening, but just bring that idea back, make it good. Maybe have some cards that are, and I guess that's the hard thing is you can't have like fields like in Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh because like global effects just make that redundant. It's already on the character. I guess that's the other thing that's really weird about Weiss Schwarz compared to pretty much every other card game is how overloaded the characters are. And maybe that's why we don't get new card types is because characters do it all.
Sure. Part of that is based on the original vision and design that this is an anime card game, and part of the appeal is the cute characters in anime. I know that part of the fun I have when playing Love Live Sunshine is that every character on the art is smiling at me and looks cute. And if I had to play a different card type of like, I don't know, a microphone on it, like that's just not nearly as fun. So I can understand why the game is so character based, because that's the fundamental appeal is the waifus and husbandos.
And it's very funny because you would think Pokemon would be the same way. It is not.
No, you're right.
Those decks are like 20, like maybe 10, 15 Pokemon, 10 energy if you're feeling spicy, and the rest are just I got a bunch of Pokeballs in my bag. Oh, here's a picture of a dude with a face. Slap that down.
You're right.
So it's just
You're
like
so right, Tim. That is, as an outsider to Pokemon, that is the most funny thing about it to me, is that it's a game that's not actually very much about the Pokemon at all.
no, it's like how many bicycles can I throw in my discard so I can burn through this deck so I can have my hand have 30 cards between turns because why not? Yeah, so it's just like it's very funny that Weiss is very structurally bound.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. So my next question here is for players starting Weiss Schwarz in 2021, what advice do you have? And I might tag on, has it changed since 2016?
I gotta think about this one.
I broke your notes. Haha.
That is so interesting, Tim. Because the community is different than it was in 2016. So thinking about what could be different about how to introduce a new player is that there are resources and communities are so much more connected than they were back then. When I started playing in 2016, it took real effort to get connected to other communities online. Pojo was this insular little thing, and you would have janky Skype games. I don't know if you had the indignity of having to play Weiss online over Skype, but Discord is so much better for that, and
Oh yeah.
it is so much easier to be able to play online, to become connected with people online than it used to be. I think though, like my advice to a new player, I think mostly things about advice for a person at a new local more than it has to be about a new player. Like the first advice is to thank your opponent for the game, which is stupid.
No, that's good.
This comes from my own personal anxieties, which I am channeling Brian Wong to reframe as excitement. This comes from my own personal excitement of trying to learn a new game, which is that you might be concerned that you're not worth your opponent's time. People come to locals because they want to try a new deck and limit test, right? And instead, if they have to play you, the new guy, they might have to hold your hand through parts of the game that you're still figuring out. They're playing against a deck that is not at the caliber of power level that they're interested in. It's not the play experience that maybe they're looking for. So those are the kind of concerns I have. But the thing I want people to remember is that Weiss players want you to keep playing with them. We are a growing hobby, and we want people to keep playing who show up to locals or who join a Discord community and say, hey, I'm learning Weiss, I want to play. So their end of the transaction is wanting to you to keep in. So your way of upholding your end of the bargain is just at a minimum to thank them for the games and be gracious.
It's funny because your rules wizard really came out there, because what I saw with thanking your opponent is building the social bonds. Everything is better when you and your opponent are working together after you just had an experience that is naturally contraposed against each other. So you're building the social connection and you're strengthening the community bonds by being gracious and thankful.
Yes. That is the Bard answer, and it's the better answer, that kind of framing. Yes, so thanking your opponent for the games. And another one is to check out the reading list. It didn't exist back in 2016. So just the pace bin did. But now you can check that out to help you along your path to learning the game and mastering the game. Mm-hmm. And the third thing that I have in mind is maybe unique. I think maybe nobody else would give this advice, so that's why I'm excited about it, not nervous at all.
Oh, hell yeah.
During friendly games, like not at a tournament, you should tell your opponent, as a new player, you should tell your opponent what kind of new player experience you want. Because I know that there can be some mismatch of expectations between you, the new player, and this person who is in the position of being both your opponent and your mentor. Mm-hmm. So you want to help them along. If they don't have the initiative to ask you this, you want to tell them the answer of what kind of hand-holding you want. Some new players, want to learn by doing. They want to make decisions, and they're okay with failure. They're okay with unsalvageable game states because they still find that a worthwhile experience. They get to own that failure. They have agency. That is their learning experience. And part of the learning experience for them is learning to recognize the fail state once it happens. So that kind of new player feels like something is taken away from their fun of learning a new game if their opponent appears like a Microsoft Clippy prompt to tell them each time they screw up and asking them whether they want to redo something. That kind of new player instead prefers to start off with a game state that is just unreadable. They don't understand this game. They don't understand how each decision is connected to the next decision, is connected to the next, and to eventually a win condition. They prefer instead to start as illiterate and failing enough to start becoming literate. So that's one kind of new player. I don't want hand-holding.
Yeah.
The other kind of new player wants their play partner to act like bumper rails. They want the play partner, their opponent, to intervene to tell them the strategic implications of a decision and why a decision might have bad outcomes on the game state. Because this kind of new player sees those fail states as failed time, as wasted time,
right,
as flailing around, terrible decisions, non-games. So instead they want, even if they don't get to have total agency here, even though their decisions aren't, even though their current level of bad mastery of the game is not one-to-one correlated with what actually happens in the game because they're bumper rails, they find those half games a better use of their time.
Right.
So setting that expectation of Do you want bumper rails and for your decisions to be shortcutted to look more like proper games? Or do you want full agency? Do you want it to be okay to reach fail states because the failure is the learning for you?
Right. And I imagine people are definitely on a spectrum too.
Yeah, for sure. It is somewhat reductive for me to say it's just these two types of people, but you should try to set that expectation with the person you're playing with, what you're looking for out of them as someone teaching you the game.
You know what? I think I actually took something away on the mentorship side because I think my natural teaching style is to kind of run a tutorial game, do the bumper rail thing, and then just go hands off after that. And I'm probably doing people a disservice with that style of teaching.
I imagine for the first game, it's hard to not set bumper
Yeah,
rails. I imagine it gets much more easy to give that player the option to make it palatable of, do you want bumper rails or do you want to fail to learn? Do you want to learn by failing if they're on like their third or fourth game?
makes sense. Moving on from that piece of advice, before we transition into our final question, note one, I noticed that you brought up Mr. Wong again, kind of bookending our episode here. So I'm going to do a bit of bookending myself. At the beginning of the episode, I openly wondered how it is possible for you to extract parts of my podcast that are like an hour deep in the episode within a half hour of release. You just told me I had a mole. I said I was going to twist your arm to get that information. Here we are. Spill the beans. What is it?
I can't give them up. It's too valuable, Tim.
Okay. Because here's what my assumption was when I actually thought about it. You're screwing with me by saying you have a mole. There is probably a very likely thing that I'm doing where I'm accidentally releasing the audio version of the podcast on Anchor before it goes up on YouTube and you're just listening to it there.
Well, that would make a lot of sense, you know. That sounds pretty plausible as a theory.
So I get
No, I'm not gonna confirm that theory though.
okay. So no matter how much arm twisting I'm doing on this podcasting, I'm not getting the one thing I wanted out of you.
Nope.
Okay, but I got other things, so we're okay. We can work with that. All right. So I know we spent a good chunk of time talking about the reading list, but what would you say is the single biggest takeaway for new content creators?
You know that I love Taya's article on this subject.
So good.
I think that it's maybe the second or third best thing that anyone's written for Weiss. So this question is so hard because I have to do something other than just tell people to read Taya's article.
Yeah, because I already had Taya on the show talking about Taya's article.
Yeah. I used to have a very different philosophy about content creation. I used to be much more critical about what I saw as subpar work than I used to be.
Okay.
Partly because I'm critical of myself, and so I then am not very selective in the target in terms of the criticism. So when work clearly doesn't get a second review before publication, I would say something. When surveys don't ask questions about how long the player's been playing, resulting in no demographic crosstabs, so no way to parse the information you're getting back when you put out a survey, or when an article clearly hasn't been rewritten after the first draft in order to be respectful of the reader's time.
Oops.
So I used to be like that, but I've gotten turned around on that by smart, thoughtful people who have a better vision of what content needs to be for a community to be strong. And I understand that it is silly for people to sit on content like an egg and incubate it for months the way that I did. Like my attack order article took half a year of me sitting on it and thinking about it, poking around on it and rewriting. And it's still complete shit. it still needs more rewrites. So I think what I would say is that, yes, Taya's article is like the second or third best thing that anyone's written about Weiss. But as your goal as a content creator, your goal is not to make the second or third best piece of content on your topic that anyone's ever made. It's just enough of a goal to make something. It is enough to say, I have something I want to say So I will say that thing. And I don't need to follow any prescription of form or length or effort that is out there. Sure, other people are doing 30-minute deck techs, okay? That doesn't mean that your deck tech needs to be 30 minutes. You could just post your list and then talk for 5 minutes about the cards that you care about and the interaction that you are interested enough to want to talk about the deck for. You don't have to have something to say about every card in order to make it a worthwhile deck tech the way that some people go deep and deep and deep and deep on. Just say the thing that interested you enough to say. It is okay to write an article and feel like you're not covering everything that other people are covering. It's okay to just say, I'm not going to get caught up in scope creep. I'm just going to write a couple paragraphs to share what I think about this subject and then press publish. That is fine, because Weiss could sure use more content. And at the very least, like, however bad you think your content is, you're always going to have me as a reader because I look at everything.
Okay.
Content creator, you are guaranteed me as a reader.
So that's how you know about like the second article I ever wrote.
Is that the
That's the Zubame Gaishi story?
Yeah.
Yeah, because
I love that story.
the first article I wrote was a Macross. It wasn't even really a deck tech. It was like a set retrospective of Macross Frontier. So something that interests me and no one else.
And that's totally fine.
Yeah.
I share this growing, I hope, sentiment that we get stronger by making more content, because content is a sign of community engagement, is a sign of players caring enough about the game to want to talk about it. So just write something. Just post the video.
Yeah.
It's fine.
And I guess, would you have anything to say for people who are just doing stuff? It might be complex, and then all of a sudden it just blows up. So I think you've probably noticed that I haven't done a lot of written work this year because everything so I keep trying to do something that's actual economics, and it keeps blowing up in my face because research is hard.
I think you might have obliquely referred to it in some past interviews.
Yes. I've had another one happen.
Man, I know that some content is a ticking time bomb of relevance. I know that like people feel pressured for, especially like set reviews. They want it to be released at a certain time frame for when people are still playing the set, and they feel the way that some procrastinators do about deadlines, that the deadline passes and their heart and stomach shrivel up and they decide to just give up and not even try to finish the thing. That goes for academics and work and any other kind of environment. And I guess my encouragement is there is always a way to reframe what you have made in a way that makes for a narrative that people can care about. Some of the best like online articles and videos I've read are from content creators about projects that failed. From content creators writing about or making a video about something that went wrong in their creative process. Those are really interesting. So I would love to read a narrative section about how an economics of Weiss Schwarz article keeps getting blown up.
Well, it's more different economics articles about Weiss Schwarz get blown up. And it's funny because it's all about what we've seen in card markets these past 2 years. So the first was a microeconomics approach where I went back to like first principles. And what's funny is the actual, like the equation math worked, but the graphs looked so stupid that for the article that would appeal to someone who's in Weiss Schwarz or moreover, someone who doesn't have an advanced undergraduate economics education, it would go over their head, and then they'd look at the pictures that are supposed to make it not go over their head and it looks stupid. I have a fully written article in my desk shelf about this.
Mm.
And then the other one that I've been working on is I'm trying to take the macroeconomic approach and say, okay, here's what the Federal Reserve did, here's what the federal government did, and here's how it impacted markets for, I'm going to use Black Lotus, but it's transferable to Weiss. As I was doing it, I learned this is a problem that's true of the entire literature. The type of methodology I was working on hasn't worked since the financial crisis.
Huh.
And the solution that people have come up with is we're going to continue developing this, but we're only going to test it going up to 2008. So there's all these papers that were published in like the 2010s that are just stop at the financial crisis. I'm just like, God damn it. But I think for that one, it's going to be, I'm going to have to go back. And this is going to be the funniest thing about this paper. There's going to be this insane methodology in the background that's using pretty much all of my research knowledge up to this point. And it's going to be like 5 paragraphs, and then the rest is going to be TLDR.
Right.
And I've done that before, right? And I remember, like, I got shit for. Did you ever read the one where I basically ran regressions to see if Pokemon and Weiss had different error rates? And then I tried to predict the number of errata in an English Weiss set using a linear regression.
I do not remember this one.
Okay, so I did that, and like I released it, and people were like, "Holy crap, that's crazy!" And then a few people were like, "Yeah, there's way too much math in this, though." And I'm like, "I even put a TLDR."
Yeah, I encourage people to. No surprise to you, but I have plenty of old partially written articles that are binned and trashed, and I decided not to keep working on them. Some of them unworkable in the same way that you have decided that yours are encountering problems. Yes, some of my ideas are unworkable in the same way that yours have been. But I'd encourage the listener, the attempted content creator listening, like, I know you, listener, have some 2017 era IMAS article that you didn't finish writing. And now you feel like it's like 4.5 years too late for it to be relevant to anybody. But you should just finish it. I want to read it. And all you need to do is reframe and add some narrative paragraphs about what Weiss was like back then. And now you've taken your ancient written article and made it a history piece.
Yep. Call it Weiss retrospective.
Right. Part of, I guess, the benefit that the game hasn't changed very much is that I can read articles about old decks and learn about what fundamentals were like for those decks and incorporate those insights into my understanding of the game right now. That is a benefit of the game having changed, not having changed very much. So just finish your IMS article, Tom, is what I'm trying to say. Tom.
Phil, get the kaleidoscope shit done. All right. So that's all the big burning questions I and the Calgary Weiss Schwarz community have for you. Before we go, though, I'd like to see if you'd be down for another podcast game. The one that I actually obliquely insulted by saying it wasn't a game, Rapid Fire. For those who don't listen to old hockey shows, or I guess my hockey show or this podcast, Rapid Fire is a segment that Jay Onright and Dan O'Toole did on their Fox Sports show, Jay and Dan. They would ask a series of lighter or sillier questions in quick succession, most of them yes or no. When they went back to Canada Sports Network, TSN, they left the segment behind. My buddy decided to take it from them, and I'm stealing it from him. Are you down to play some Rapid Fire?
I am ready to play.
Perfect. Let's go. Better meta, English or Japanese?
English.
Best place for food after weeklies in your neck of the woods in Texas?
Ramen Tatsuya. Not Michi Ramen. They're very different. Ramen Tatsuya. The line is very long, but for a good reason.
Okay, love to hear it. Best thing to do in your neck of the woods in Texas that is not a tourist trap? You may say the Alamo.
Well, I hadn't thought about it. So, for a card gaming audience, Pat's Games. Pat's Games is really good. If you play Magic the Gathering, the owners there love the game. They've got Magic art all over the walls, laminated cards in the decoration. I love those guys. And best store I've ever been to, Pat's Games. Anything else that's not card game related, I'm a tourist in my own town here in Austin. I barely go outside the Four Corners. So I got nothing for you. Go paddleboarding.
Okay.
The river's nice.
Okay. So we remember the Alamo. Got it. Can the Weiss Almanac predict bands a year out?
No, I barely write anything once a year at all myself. So that's a tall order. No.
Does Kevin deserve the flaming he gets?
No.
Good.
Kevin must be protected.
Perfect. That about wraps us up for today. Thank you again, Alex, for coming on the show. I think we've recorded something awesome here. If you liked what you heard in this interview, make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. Search Wild Wild Weiss. You'll find our previous interview with Weiss Tea Time author Taya Gary, owner of SBTCG and former world champion Yue Peng, Ken Takahata, and Philip McKay, along with a bunch of other thoughtful Weiss discussion from the Calgary Weiss Schwarz community. If you want to check out our written work, head on over to wildwildweiss.wordpress.com. Check out our video content on YouTube. Search Wild Wild Weiss. Catch us every Friday for some live action on twitch.tv/wildwildweiss. Follow us on Twitter and check out the Calgary Weiss Schwarz community on Facebook or Discord. Now that I've got all of my shilling out of the way, what do you got for us?
wsalmanac.wordpress.com occasionally has content posted there, and of course the reading list. I actually wrote something recently. I wrote on the subject of writing something short and just getting it out there. I wrote a small little thing about the recent ban list and why it makes me optimistic about maybe Bushiroad reconsidering its scorched earth policy on bans. So you could check that recent post out about scorched earth bans.
Nice.
And also the Facebook group Weiss Schwarz Global. I believe it is the highest membership of any Weiss related Facebook group. And I think we offer a good platform not only to discuss the game, but also to sell and make transactions. And
I think you also need to show the person who's telling me where all the juicy stuff is in my podcasts. You know, it's only fair.
No shout outs to the Rat and the Wild Wild Weiss organization. You know who you are. Thank you very much. Your effort is appreciated. And thank you, Tim. I'm a big fan of this stuff. I'm surprised we haven't gotten to talk this much before, and I had a really good time. I am excited to have been on here.
Thank you. I'm glad it was excitement and not nervousness because I'm going to break kayfabe here. The first thing you said is like, are you sure?
Yeah, well, I'm glad that I had enough stuff to talk about to fill out an interview.
We've been going for almost 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I know that I'm long-winded, and I know that most interview advice recommends keep it short so that the interviewer can get to hit all their beats and talk about everything they want to talk about. And I definitely did not manage that. So good luck with editing down the sections that you want to cut in order to make the video watchable.
You know I don't do that. Alrighty then. Until next time, this has been Tim Jensey, and I hope to see y'all next time.